Hello everyone. In this module, we will review the 5 stages of second language acquisition and how they relate to our English learners. I will briefly explain each stage of second language acquisition and list some of the characteristics associated to each respective stage. Then I will explain tiered questions and provide examples of what these questions may look like. I will discuss the relationship between Bloom's taxonomy and the stages of second language acquisition. And finally, I will briefly discuss the research regarding the time frame it takes English learners to move through all 5 stages of second language acquisition. Stephen Krashen and Tracy Terrell first explored the stages of second language acquisition in 1983. To learn more on the topic of second language acquisition, I encourage you to explore the book Classroom Instruction That Works with English Language Learners by Hill and Miller. Researchers identified 5 predictable stages through which students advance when they are acquiring a second language. Pre-production, which lasts from 0 to 6 months, also known as the silent period. You most likely won't hear students speak any English at all. Early production, which is similar to when children first begin to speak in their native language, lasts from 6 months to 1 year. Stage 3, speech emergence, lasts from 1 to 3 years. Intermediate fluency lasts from 3 to 5 years. And finally, stage 5, advanced fluency, which lasts from 5 to 7 years, is when English learners begin to demonstrate a near native level of fluency. Let's take a look at some of the characteristics associated to stage 1 pre-production. At this stage, an English learner has minimal comprehension without scaffolds. He or she does not verbalize, does nod yes and no, and may draw to express a feeling or thought and or point at an object. As mentioned before, this stage lasts from 0 to 6 months. It's important to note that English learners at this stage may have up to 500 words in their receptive vocabulary, but they are not yet speaking. And it's also critical for teachers to understand that the school day may be exhausting for these newcomers or pre-emergent English learners, as they are overwhelmed with listening to English language all day long. Stage 2, early production. English learners have limited comprehension without support. They are able to produce 1 to 2 word responses, are able to participate using keywords and familiar phrases, and are able to use present tense verbs. This stage lasts 6 months to 1 year. By then, English learners would have developed 1,000 English words, speak in 1 or 2 word phrases. Teachers working with English learners in this stage of English language learning, for example, can accept 1 or 2 word responses, build vocabulary using pictures, use pictures and regalia to support questions, and or use simple books with predictable text. In stage 3, speech emergence, the English learner has good comprehension. He or she can produce simple sentences such as I ate pizza or she has blue eyes, makes grammatical pronunciation errors such as may I go to library, and may misunderstand sarcasm and or jokes. At this stage, an English learner has developed a vocabulary of about 3,000 words, and it is recommended that teachers who work with English learners at this stage to develop lessons that encourage them to sound out stories phonetically, match vocabulary words to definitions, write in dialogue journals, and complete graphic organizers with word banks. Stage 4, intermediate fluency. The student has excellent comprehension, makes few grammatical errors, uses sentences of increasing length and complexity, and is able to provide their opinions during one-on-one discussions and more willing to voice their opinions in whole group discussions. By this time, English learners have accumulated approximately 6,000 vocabulary words and are able to work in grade level math and science classes with some teacher support. At this stage, teachers will notice English learners use strategies from their native language to learn content in English. Finally, stage 5, advanced fluency. English learners are at near native level of speech. By now, English learners have developed specialized vocabulary. They will fully participate in classroom activities with occasional scaffolds. These are the students who have passed the AZELA, have demonstrated satisfactory scores when participating in state assessments, and are engaged with the mainstream curriculum, that is, sitting in a mainstream ELA, science, math, and/or history class. And most importantly, English learners at this stage have achieved what is known as cognitive academic language proficiency, or CALP. More on CALP will be presented later in this module. In this section, I will go over tiered questions and Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Tiered questions is a strategy teachers can use to ask questions associated to a student's stage of second language acquisition. Now more than ever, teachers need to possess knowledge about the stages of second language acquisition. Recently introduced legislative policies in how to educate Arizona's English language learners have paved the way for more English learners to access mainstream curriculum. It is critical for teachers to understand and know each student's zone of proximal development, that area between what the student is capable of at the moment and the point you want the student to reach next. So how exactly can we apply it to the stages of second language acquisition? In stage 1, pre-production, we can ask questions that students can answer by pointing. For example, circle the car, or where is the crayon, or who has the pencil, or show me the horse. We want to continue asking questions from the next tier, stage 2, early production. Again, we want all students, but especially English learners, to navigate the zone of proximal development. Here's an example. Where is the cat? If the student is looking at a picture, for example, the expectation is for the student to point at the cat. A question from the next tier can be a yes or no question. Is the cat sleeping? The student will study the picture further and will provide a yes or no response. Let's look at stage 2, early production. Teachers can ask questions that students can answer with one-word responses. Yes, no questions, who or what questions, how many, either or questions. And again, we want to push students to the next level by asking other questions in stage 3, speech emergence. Here's an example. Do you have a favorite movie? Then you can ask a question from the next tier. Why is that your favorite movie? In stage 3, speech emergence, students are able to say simple sentences. Teachers can ask why, how questions. They can ask students to explain. The idea is for students to provide a phrase or short answer instead of just a yes or no or one word response. Again, challenging the student by having them navigate their zone of proximal development is our ultimate goal. Here's an example. Explain how you got that answer. A question from the next tier could be, what would happen if you did it this way? Teachers can increase English learners' engagement with the content and provide opportunities for them to practice English at the same time. In stage 4, intermediate fluency, we can ask questions like, what would happen if, why do you think, or questions that require more than one sentence response. For example, what would happen if we mix these two colors? The student could possibly provide a response where he or she states that it would change to another color. The teacher can challenge the student by asking him or her to restate what they said by using a higher level vocabulary word such as alter or modify. When students reach stage 5, advanced fluency, we expect them to make use of their developing vocabulary repertoire. By now, they have the ability to participate fully in a classroom discussion and have achieved cognitive academic language proficiency, or CALP. The student now understands when a teacher asks him or her to decide if, retell, or describe. In this example, the teacher asks, what approach would you take to solve this equation or problem or situation? The idea is for a student to sound like a scientist or historian or news reporter when providing a response. The teacher can ask, can you elaborate on why you chose this way to solve X, Y, or Z? Now let's look at tiered thinking across stages of second language acquisition and the relationship with Bloom's taxonomy. First, let's review the Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. There are 6 levels of cognitive learning according to the revised version of Bloom's taxonomy. These levels can be helpful in developing learning outcomes because certain verbs are particularly appropriate at each level and not appropriate at other levels. Teachers who ask questions from the remembering tier are asking students to retrieve, recall, or recognize relevant knowledge from long-term memory. For example, students might be tasked to recall dates of important dates in US history, remember the main steps of the writing process, and so on. The understanding tier is defined as demonstrating comprehension through one or more forms of explanation. For example, students could classify a mental illness, compare ritual practices in 2 different religions, compare one democratic nation against a totalitarian nation, and so forth. In applying, we want students to use information or a skill in a new situation. For example, a teacher could ask students to use Newton's second law to solve a problem, or apply a literary or feminist theoretical lens when examining appropriate pieces of text. If we ask students to analyze, we are asking them to break material into its constituent parts and determine how the parts relate to one another and or to an overall structure or purpose. For example, they can analyze the relationship between different characters in a play, analyze the relationship between different institutions in a society, or explain the three branches of the US government. The evaluating tier is defined as making judgments based on criteria or standards. For example, a teacher might ask students to detect inconsistencies or fallacies within a process or product, determine whether a scientist's conclusions follow from observed data, judge which two methods is the way to solve a given problem, and so forth. The ultimate goal of a teacher is to get all their students to the creating tier in Bloom's taxonomy. The creating tier is defined as putting elements together to form a new, coherent, or functional whole. Reorganize elements into a new pattern or structure. Here, students have the opportunity to create, design, develop, invent. For example, students can design a new set for a theater production, write a thesis to develop an alternative hypothesis based on criteria, invent a product, compose a piece of music, or write a play. Keep in mind that pre-emergent, emergent English learners or newcomers with limited verbal output does not necessarily mean that they have limited cognition. It is always recommended that teachers ask English learners high-level questions regardless of their level of language acquisition. Hill and Miller reminds us that Bloom's taxonomy provides a structure for categorizing questions' levels of abstraction so we can distinguish between questions that require lower level thinking and those that require higher level thinking. Here you see a set of axes that represent the idea that students learning English can work at all levels of higher order thinking, regardless of their level of English language acquisition. The goal here is for teachers to understand that if they direct and maintain English learners' engagement at the lowest levels of thinking, then they confine them to the lowest levels of learning. This thinking language matrix can help mainstream teachers keep all levels of language learners engaged at all levels of thinking. So how long should it take an English learner to pass through the stages of second language acquisition? In this last section, I will zone in on the research that will help us answer this question. In their 1997 comprehensive study, Thomas and Collier found that under the most favorable conditions, for example, newcomers receive 2 years of native language support, English learners can be expected to test at grade level in English in 5 to 7 years. They also found that under less than favorable conditions, English learners might not become proficient for 7 to 10 years. For example, if newcomers arrive to a US school with little to no formal education. Jim Cummings has been a driving force behind bilingual education for the past 3 decades. His research has laid a foundation for the understanding of language as a cognitive development rather than behavior. In his early work on English learners, Cummings described language acquisition as an iceberg. He describes the tip of the iceberg, what is visible above water, as conversational English. Cummings describes this as basic interpersonal communicative skills, or BICS. This is the normal everyday speech. It is the ability to understand and speak informally with friends, teachers, and parents. Typically, English learners can develop this conversational ability after about 2 years of living in the United States because it is not too demanding intellectually. However, They have not developed academic English, the large portion of the iceberg that is hidden under the sea. Cummings describes academic English as cognitive academic language proficiency, or CALP. This is the language of the classroom, the language of complex compound sentences, photosyntheses, historical manuscripts, polynomials, etc. English learners must master academic English to understand content-specific textbooks and vocabulary, write essays and reports, solve mathematical word problems, and take assessments. It is important to recognize that without academic English, English learners cannot develop the critical thinking and problem-solving skills needed to understand and express the new and abstract concepts taught in the mainstream environment. I thank you for taking the time to learn about the 5 stages of second language acquisition. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have further questions regarding this topic or any other items concerning our English learners in our district.